Okay, so I caught a bit of an interview with Floyd Mayweather Jr. And I don't know the exact date of the interview, but I assume it was quite recent. And basically, in the interview, Floyd Mayweather's talking about the late Muhammad Ali, and he talks about how Ali was a great fighter, and he owes Muhammad Ali for putting him where he is. That is to say, that Ali opened the door for fighters like Mayweather. Um, but he also said something controversial, and it's something that Mayweather said a few times now, which is that he believes he is a greater boxer than Muhammad Ali. Now, he was actually quite diplomatic in the way he said it, and I'll come into my views on this in a second. But basically, he said, um, as a standard bearer for, I keep a boxing journal actually, I write down these things. What he said was, bear with me a second. I really should prepare more for these videos. Um, yeah, if it's for standing for a cause, then Ali gets it. That is to say that Ali is a cultural figure, and Mayweather was basically acknowledging that he's not. Um, so he acknowledged Ali's greatness, but he said something, I didn't quite make it out, but something like, I'm almost 40, I'm not going to say another fighter's greater than me. Now, this is my take on it. Um, I actually think that I actually respect Mayweather for saying this, and this is why. There is a sort of environment in the world of boxing, and it's been apparent for a long time, that treats Muhammad Ali as sort of a marble figure that cannot be criticised, who cannot be criticised, I should say. And he seems to be the only fighter who's put on this podium. I mean, certainly you'll get fans who are very loyal to a particular fighter. I mean, Filipino fans are going to treat Pacquiao that way. Italian American fans are going to treat Marciano that way. But almost universally, there's this notion that Muhammad Ali cannot be criticized, either as a fighter or as a person. Now, Mayweather is the only fighter that I can think of who has actually said he believes he's greater than Ali. Well, Tyson Fury has said a few rash things, but he hasn't brought Ali into it. Said things like, I'm the greatest fighter ever, and all that sort of stuff. But Mayweather is the only fighter that has actually, by name, said that he believes he's greater than Ali. Now, Mayweather's taken a lot of slack for this from contemporary other notable fighters. He said it going up to the Pacquiao fight, and he got a lot of slack, not least from Layla Ali for understandable reasons. She doesn't like someone criticizing her father. But I actually respect Mayweather for basically not being afraid to speak his mind. I don't particularly like Mayweather. I've said this many times. I do find him quite arrogant in some ways. But on this score, look at it this way. Are we really to have a situation whereby it's taken as gospel that Ali is the greatest fighter of all time and no one can ever question that? And there's never going to be any fighter who surpasses that? Really? You know, modern boxing's been around for 3 centuries, at least. And it seems almost absurd that only one fighter can have that mantle bestowed upon him. That this guy and this guy alone is somehow above any sort of scrutiny as a fighter or as a person. As a person, Ali was very controversial. No question about it. And I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of that. But let's just stick to the sports side of it. Let's just stick to the athletic side of it. And Mayweather made a fair point. Ali was beaten by a guy who had only had 7 professional fights. I assume he's referring to Trevor Berbick. Whatever way you look at it, Muhammad Ali did not have a perfect record. He did lose, I believe it was 5 fights. Now, you can make all sorts of rational explanation for this. So he fought way past his time. He made bad decisions due to bad management. Um, he had time robbed from him because of the way the boxing authorities treated him over the draft issue, and that wasn't Ali's fault. So there's a lot of reasons why his record wasn't perfect. But An imperfect record is an imperfect record. And in the end of the day, no one was forcing Ali to fight past, say, 1976. Muhammad Ali made that choice. I know people say that the Parkinson's was setting in and he wasn't aware of what he was doing. I'm not really convinced by that argument. Ali certainly was a shadow of his former self, but I think he knew what he was doing and I think he wanted to fight. I mean, if you're going to use that logic, then that logic has to be used for every great fighter who fights past his best. And unfortunately, there's been many other examples. Now, to me, a great fighter should also be a wise fighter. And guys like Joe Calzaghe, Floyd Mayweather, and others, Rocky Marciano added that, retired at the right time when they had, well, in all three cases, Joe Calzaghe, Rocky Marciano, Floyd Mayweather Jr., they had perfect records, i.e., they were undefeated. And they retired. In the case of Rocky Marciano, his professional career was not actually particularly long by the standards of the day. I think it was 6 years. Calzaghe's was a bit longer, so was Mayweather's. But the point is, all these guys retired when they were in good health, when they were relatively young, at least compared to other fighters. And to me, that actually deserves credit. I think one of the saddest things in boxing is seeing a great fighter go past his time. Now, in the case of Bernard Hopkins, he is exceptional because he possessed athleticism and skills that most men his age didn't have. But you have other guys like Muhammad Ali, but other examples include, well, there's many, many examples. Roy Jones Jr., um, guys who just went on too long, perhaps because they knew nothing else, perhaps because they simply loved the sport so much. And it's sad because they're a shadow of their former selves, but it's also unfortunate because that that's really damaging them. And unfortunately, the way this situation is as long as they pass the medical tests, they can do it. The moral question is, should they do it? Um, but the very fact that Mayweather is prepared to challenge this kind of notion that it's blasphemy to question Ali, I actually respect that. Now, no one can accuse Mayweather of not having confidence. I mean, every fighter has to have confidence, and every fighter at that level does have confidence. But Mayweather's confidence is almost unparalleled, and that shows in a guy that's prepared to say he believes he's greater than Muhammad Ali. And in this occasion, I don't think that's arrogance. Now, usually I would say that Mayweather can be arrogant because I think he can. Not in this one, because in this one, I think there is actually some truth in what he's saying. So, looking at actual academic studies of pound for pound greatest fighter ever, it's quite interesting. And I'll quote one source. I'm not saying it's the best source, I'm just saying it's one source. Boxrec. Boxrec obviously is very comprehensive. Now, Boxrec has the following list for pound greatest fighters of all time. And bear in mind, only a few years ago, I saw another list that had Mayweather somewhere like 37th pound for pound greatest fighter of all time. Well, this is a list now, as of 2017. This is how the list stands. This is very interesting. Number 1, Floyd Mayweather Jr. 2, Sugar Ray Robinson. 3, Archie Moore. 4, Manny Pacquiao. 5, Muhammad Ali. 6, Bernard Hopkins. 7, Julio Cesar Chavez. 8, Sam Langford. 9, Roy Jones Jr. 10, Joe Louis. I'll just read out the next 10 just because it's interesting. 11, Evander Holyfield. 12, Harry Greb. 13, Emil Griffith. 14, Oscar de la Hoya. 15, Vladimir Klitschko. 16, Azuma Nelson. 17, Carlos Monson. 18, Carlos Ortiz. 19, Roberto Duran. 20, Joe Gans. Now, it has to be said that Boxrec has some surprising results. They have Willie Pep only at 40. Many other sources would put him in the top 5. And they have the great Sugar Ray Leonard only at 45. So, of course, it's contentious. And the truth is, any list like this is always going to be contentious. Now, looking at some of the other guys they have up there, I don't think anyone will question Manny Pacquiao's greatness. winning titles in as many different divisions as he has, taking on the sort of names that he has. Bernard Hopkins, exceptional fighter. Again, I don't think anyone would question that. And Sugar Ray Robinson, well, Muhammad Ali himself ranked Sugar Ray Robinson as the greatest pound for pound fighter ever. The other interesting one is Archie Moore, Ancient Archie. That's the first time I've seen Archie Moore that high. Incidentally, a fighter they don't have in top 10 or even top 20 is Henry Armstrong, which surprises me. Again, Henry Armstrong is a guy that is almost always in the top five. Um, so it's an interesting list, it's a controversial list. So, the follow up question: does Floyd Mayweather deserve to be in the number one spot? Well, as I said in my previous video, as a defensive fighter, I believe Floyd Mayweather is one of the greatest of all time. Definitely the greatest of his generation, and quite possibly the greatest of all time. The thing about boxing is that old school fighters were tough as nails, but the problem, say pre 1940, is that records are patchy, very hard to determine. So if you look at records of guys from, 100 years ago, they had some astonishing records. Take, for example, Jimmy Wilde, Britain's great Jimmy Wilde, who sadly is almost a forgotten figure today. He had 90 straight wins. 90 straight wins. And he had some losses after that. That's astonishing. Um, a bit more recently in history, Carlos Monson had something like, I forget the exact record, but he had only three losses matched up against over 80 wins. Tommy Ryan, another old school fighter, again, over 80 wins, only two or three losses. So there's some truly astonishing record from the past. But it isn't just about records, of course, it's about who someone fights. Perhaps the reason Jimmy Wilde is not better known is that, in all honesty, he only had one or two world title fights, and that was quite late in his career. Now, one thing that both Muhammad Ali and Floyd Mayweather have in common is that both guys had huge names on their resume. I mean, Muhammad Ali fought everyone that was around at the time. You know, the 70s was a golden age of heavyweights. Ali fought everyone. Um, I would argue the 2000s and the 2010s has been a golden era for welterweights. Again, Mayweather's fought pretty much every big welterweight there is. So, and again, I stand by that logic that this idea about Mayweather running is a lot of nonsense. People need to understand that boxing isn't street fighting. Boxing is a professional sport. It's hit and don't get hit. I think one reason that Ali is more popular than Mayweather is because he was a cultural icon. He's probably more famous overall. I mean, Muhammad Ali is known all over the world. Floyd Mayweather, in all honesty, is probably just known in the US, Britain, Mexico, and the Philippines. You know, he's not really, and he's definitely not a cultural icon. We don't think America Floyd Mayweather. We think of him as just another American boxer who happens to be the best American boxer. But he's not a cultural icon in the way that Ali was. Ali was very often a controversial figure. Mayweather is also a controversial figure, but for different reasons. Mayweather is controversial because of his perceived arrogance and also his criminal record outside the ring. Ali was controversial because of his contentious politics. Um, but personally, I do get a little bit tired of the notion in boxing that Muhammad Ali is above criticism. It's almost a personality cult. And you know, you can't even say that without being slammed as a hater or something like that. It's ridiculous. Um, there's no question about it. Muhammad Ali is one of the greatest fighters of all time. He's almost certainly the most famous fighter of all time. I think the only fight that will come close to that level of fame is probably Mike Tyson. Third, in terms of fame, possibly I would say it's a tie between Sugar Ray Robinson, Manny Pacquiao, and Rocky Marciano. Marciano had a bit of a cultural impact in the 50s. Manny Pacquiao transcends his sport, and Sugar Ray Robinson was until Muhammad Ali, the greatest pound for pound fighter. Joe Louis also had a huge cultural impact. Um, but how do you determine fame with these things? It's very difficult to tell because the world has a much bigger population today than it did in the 1970s or the 1940s. So it's very, very difficult to weigh this up. Um, so based on what Mayweather is saying in terms of record, he has a point. I mean, no one can say that Mayweather hasn't an impressive resume because the guys he fought were themselves very impressive champions. It's not like he fought a lot of average fighters. I mean, Floyd Mayweather fought Manny Pacquiao, Miguel Cotto. You know, the list goes on and on and on. The number of great guys that Mayweather fought and beat. And no one could take that away from him. Whether you like Mayweather or despise Mayweather, I don't think anyone could deny that he is a great fighter. Greatest of all time is quite a contentious claim. I'd be tempted to say that's pushing it, but I wouldn't have a problem with Mayweather being in the top five. Who do I think's the greatest of all time? Honestly, I don't know. I wouldn't give it to Ali because I think to be the greatest of all time, you have to have a near perfect record. Ali didn't. The fact of the matter is, Muhammad Ali lost to some fairly mediocre fighters. Now, people can say all they want that that wasn't Ali's best, but in the end of the day, it's part of his record. And that doesn't take anything away from the greatness of Muhammad Ali. It's just the fact that he was beaten by Trevor Berbick, and it's part of the record. So, in my opinion, to be at the very top, you need a near perfect record. I'm not necessarily saying it should be an undefeated fighter, because you get someone like Sven Otka who was undefeated, but is hardly going to be ranked in the top 10 or top 20. So being undefeated in itself isn't necessarily a sign of greatness. Although I happen to believe that Rocky Marciano, Joe Calzaghe, and Floyd Mayweather, being undefeated fighters, it was also the guys they fought. Because in all three cases, they fought and beat great fighters. I mean, in the case of Rocky Marciano, he defeated Ezra Charles. In the case of Joe Calzaghe, he defeated Roy Jones Jr. and Bernard Hopkins. And in the case of Floyd Mayweather, he defeated Manny Pacquiao, Miguel Cotto, and others. So I don't think anyone could take away Mayweather's greatness, whatever people think of him. I think I remember one thing that commentators said at the end of the Pacquiao fight was the crowd and the viewers don't appreciate that they're watching a legend in action. And I think Mayweather is going to be one of those guys that may be appreciated more after their time. Having said that, Mayweather somewhat revels in being the villain sometimes. I mean, he hasn't exactly endeared himself to the public. So, like I said in the previous video, my sympathy isn't that strong because he, I don't think he is the most upstanding champion there's ever been. Far from it. I don't like the way he flaunts his wealth. And someone in his position, I do think he could be using it for much greater purposes. I disagree with many of Muhammad Ali's politics, but one thing I will give him is that he stood by his conviction, and I do give Ali credit for that. So let me know your thoughts. Who was the greatest fighter of all time? And I don't mind people saying they believe it was Ali because Ali certainly has a strong claim. But what I don't like and what I don't agree with is this notion that Ali is above scrutiny or above critique. No fighter, no fighter is above critique because no fighter is superhuman. All fighters are men, flesh and blood. And I don't think there's any such thing actually as a perfect fighter. There's certain fighters that have come pretty close to it. Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali at his peak, Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao at his peak. These guys, Henry Armstrong, they were like poetry in motion. So what do you think? Who's greater, Mayweather or Ali? Of the two, I'd have to say on records, possibly Mayweather. It is true that Ali had probably more wars. Ali had more fights. Um, and you could pair the resumes. I mean, you'd have to stack up Joe Frazier versus a Manny Pacquiao. Look at the opponents. And I think you'd find the opponents are pretty even when you look at both guys' resumes. I mean, no one can accuse Floyd Mayweather of taking easy fights. That's nonsense. As for running, again, nonsense. Because people who accuse Floyd Mayweather of running don't know a thing about boxing. They don't understand it's a case of hit and don't get hit. And it's not a case that Floyd Mayweather was always in that posture. He did have fights actually where he was right in on the action. So let's be fair. Okay, I'll round it up here. Let me know your thoughts. Who was the greatest fighter of all time and why? Also, what do you think of the Boxrec list? No doubt that's going to create controversy. What do you think of it? Let me know your thoughts.